Good morning, and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. As we continue this week after Father's Day, looking at some fathers in the Bible who were good fathers and some who were not so good, I need to remind you that culture and society were different in Bible times than things are nowadays. In those days, they lived in a patriarchal society. The men were in charge of things, and well, women in that day had very limited roles. Their chief role was to provide children for the man, and secondary to that, they were in charge of the household. That allowed the man to be concerned about and focused on things outside the home. The man tended to the flocks and herds and crops, the business of the farm, the matters with their neighbors and town as a whole. Women dealt with the upkeep of the home, preparing food, getting water, and raising the children. Sometimes when I read the Bible, it almost seems like the fathers hardly know their children. The Bible seems to present quite a few excuse me, quite a few hands-off fathers who are remote from their children as they tend to everything else. But the children are their mother's responsibility. That seems especially true in our example of bad fathering today, Isaac. But before we get too down on Isaac as a father, perhaps we ought to consider his own childhood as something that may have shaped him. Isaac's father was Abraham, and Isaac was the son of the promise. God had promised Abraham that he would be the father of many nations, and yet he had no child until Isaac was born when Abraham was 100 years old. And then, with everything, the whole future, hinging on Isaac, God told Abraham to sacrifice his only son. Now it turned out to be only a test of Abraham's faith, but one must wonder about what that experience was like for Isaac. What did it say to him about the place of fathers and sons? We don't know. What we know is that Isaac had twin sons who couldn't have been more different. Esau was a man's man, dark, hairy, a hunter, brash and bold. Jacob was a homebody, hanging out in the tent, helping his mother. Yet, when it came time to receive Isaac's blessing, Jacob was able to fool Isaac into thinking he was Esau and got the blessing intended for Esau. I don't think it's good for a father or any parent to be that remote from his children as to hardly know them. God intends us to love and to be involved with our children, like Job was. Now, frankly, we don't exactly know how Job was with his children. He may have been just as remote as Isaac was. After all, that was what society in that day directed people to do. But there's an important passage right at the very beginning of Job that tells us that Job loved his children. In Job 1, we find the introduction to the story of Job, and it says, "There once was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. That man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. There were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters. He had 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 donkeys, and very many servants, so that this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. His sons used to go and hold feasts in one another's houses in turn, and they would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. And when the feast days had run their course, Job would send and sanctify them, and he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, 'It may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts.' This is what Job always did." Now there are several things to note there. Job raised a family where his adult children enjoyed being together. That's a mark of love. They sought each other out and spent time together, and I think that only comes as a result of being loved as they were reared. But more importantly, the last part of that passage indicates that Job prayed regularly for his children. He made sacrifices for them, praying and acting for their welfare. In fact, the passage says this is what Job always did. Maybe that's a pretty good example for us to follow. We may not sacrifice animals on an altar any longer, but perhaps over and over we are called to sacrifice something of ourselves for the betterment of our children. Moreover, Job prayed for his children daily, and I think that's another model for what we should do and how we should be as parents. Maybe you've never thought about it, but praying for our children is the mark of love. Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.